First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Kimberly Kay, and I'm the senior contributing editor for Legal Insurrection blog, where I have been since 2014. And I'm also the director of operations and editorial development with the Legal Insurrection Foundation, which is a 501c3. So just to clear out a couple housekeeping things before we get started. First of all, nothing you hear tonight is legal advice in any way, shape, or form. And we're simply here to discuss and advise you on matters of personal privacy, and only as it pertains to legal, lawful, constitutionally protected speech. That alone. Just so everyone's clear about what it is we're discussing here, because especially right now, words are really important. And so we want to make sure we're very clear about that. But just to give you an idea of how things will go this evening, I'm going to do just a very, very brief introduction, and I'm going to pass it over to Professor William Jacobson, who is the publisher of the Legal Insurrection blog, the president of the Legal Insurrection Foundation, and who is also a clinical law professor at Cornell Law School, where he teaches security law. And then, as I'm sure y'all are all aware and really excited to hear from, we're thrilled to have Amy with us this evening, and she's the chief policy officer at Parler, and I'm sure that she can walk us through things that are happening there and any updates that might be happening in their experience. And then last but definitely not least, I'm actually really excited about this. We have Michelle Ray, who I've known for as long as I've been involved in this world, so about a decade, and she's going to wrap this up with some solutions for us, right? So everyone's really concerned about, if we can't use the big platforms that we're used to using and have kind of been funneled into over the last decade, where do we go? What do we use? Which ones are better? Which ones should we stay away from, and why? And so she has all of that for you. So be really excited about that. And then when we get to the end of that, we will be taking questions and answers live. So again, as a matter of housekeeping, the chat section, please use that to engage with one another, make friends. Please keep it civil. That's not something we usually have to say, but these are very extraordinary times. Anyway, and so if you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A section. As we go through this program, I will be monitoring the questions and we'll be answering them live. So we won't be answering them directly to that. And if you can keep the questions focused directly to the topic at hand, that would be really helpful too. We know that these are, again, extraordinary times. Usually I talk about how excited we are to host these events. I think the tone and tenor is a little bit different now as we're looking into another era. That said, though, be at peace and know that you are not alone. Okay, so we are here. There's tons of other people who are here who have the same concerns as you, and together we're going to get through all of this. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to Professor Jacobson.
Hi, thank you to everybody for coming tonight. I know there's a lot going on in the world, and we're going to try to talk about one of the most serious problems that I think we face as non-liberals, and I emphasize that. It's not just conservatives who are under fire. It's anybody who is center or right of center is really under fire and under stress. I'd like to thank Kimberly for putting this all together. I'd love to thank Amy for being here. She's got a lot going on in her life right now, and that she took the time out tonight to join us is really appreciated. And Michelle also, who I think is going to have some really important pointers and is somebody we're turning to on behalf of Legal Insurrection for advice on a lot of these things. I also want to reiterate what Kimberly mentioned, that nothing that we're talking about tonight is meant to protect people or to advise people on how to do anything that's illegal. We are talking about protecting constitutionally protected free speech and freedom of association. So protecting the rights guaranteed to us by the Constitution. Collapses, I've often heard the phrase, collapses of societies happen slowly and then very suddenly. And I think we are in the very suddenly part, particularly as it pertains to internet freedom and freedom of speech. And the ability to speak freely. I first noticed this, have followed it for 12 years that legal insurrection's been around, of the slow part, more or less where it started. And it started on campuses. That's where it started. The sorry about that. The shoutdowns and the shutdowns that took place on campuses really were the precursor to what is going on now. And the way they accomplished it is expansive notions of hate speech. What is hate speech? Of course, there's no constitutional thing such as hate speech, but what they did is they established certain people who would not be allowed to speak, even if their speech was protected by law. They called them Nazis or fascists or whatever they want to call them, and then they'd expand it. And now everybody was a fascist or a Nazi or something else. They'd expand it to suit their political needs, and that's how they would keep people off of campuses. And then it moved off campus, and we followed that also, and it's actually hit us at Legal Insurrection. We lost our YouTube account with zero notice. I woke up one day and we're locked out and didn't even know why. And fortunately, because we were able to get publicity, I was able to make some contacts with a lot of work, we were able to get the account back. But that was something that really struck home to me, that we had 8 years worth of videos, many of them unique to us, original to us, where we were unable to access them. And there was nobody to call. There's nobody at YouTube or Google to call. We got kicked off of Amazon Associates, which is their advertising revenue sharing program. And they gave us another thing. I got a notice on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning out of the blue, no warning, that you've been kicked off for violating our policies. And it literally said, there is no appeal from this decision. Well, I didn't take no appeal for what it was worth. And I did. I moved it up the line. I got publicity. And they said, well, you're doing X, Y, and Z in violation of our rules. And we said, actually, we're not. Yes, you are. I said, we're not. Please show us evidence. Oh, we can't show you the evidence because our investigative methodology is proprietary. So that's how arrogant these big tech and these big companies are. I'm convinced we've been shadow banned at Twitter. Been on Twitter for a decade. We can't seem to break the 40,000 follower mark. Now, maybe we're just not that popular. Maybe the stuff we tweet just isn't that interesting to people, but that never made sense to me. Our tweets never get retweeted more than 10 times. Never made sense to me. And we actually have a test case of this. And the test case of it is when we moved to Parler. In 10 years at Twitter, we could barely get 40,000 followers. In 8 months at Parler, we had 400,000, and it became one of our major sources of traffic, not the major, but among social media. So there's a good test case. There's nothing wrong with what we were doing. It was the platform we were on. We've been throttled many times by Facebook. Once based on ridiculous fact checks where they said we didn't present the full context of something. Not that what we said was false, but we didn't present the full context. Another time, just recently in December, for about 2 to 3 weeks, we were throttled because of an alleged violation of community standards, and they wouldn't tell us what it was, despite repeated requests. Because we've been throttled so many times at Facebook, I actually had a team that I could contact. They said they're looking into it. They eventually told us it's been lifted. They still haven't told me what it is we did wrong. And so that's another example of this slow thing we've been seeing over time, that large internet actors are acting to negatively towards people who are not liberal. The deplatforming has become worse, but it's also been slow in coming. One of the first pushes was to deplatform Alex Jones. And Alex Jones, by any standard, is a conspiracy theorist, conspiracy nut. But he was deplatformed, so nobody really objected. He was kicked off of various social media and various platforms, and people didn't really want to be the ones defending Alex Jones, but that set an example. Then there was the one of the website run by the neo-Nazi group called Stormfront. They really formed the current model for deplatforming. But again, nobody wanted to be the one defending them or speaking up for them, but they were not only kicked off of the normal social media platforms, they were kicked off of hosting services. They were kicked off of payment processors. They were kicked off of internet gateways like Cloudflare. And of course, nobody wanted to be the one defending them, but these models established themselves. So you had the campus model of shouting people down, the expansive notion of hate speech, calling everybody a fascist who shouldn't be heard. You have large internet platforms like Twitter and Facebook, which control so much of the political speech in the country. And then you have the worst actors models being developed against them. And those models are now being applied to a lot of different people, including Parler. The difference now, I think, is that the big tech oligopoly isn't reacting to outside pressure. They are initiating this on their own. And that is really one of the most worrying things. I think it's fair to say that big tech is probably the single greatest threat to our ability to speak and to associate that we face right now. Because if the government were to do that, it would clearly be a violation of the First Amendment. We could sue them in court. We could sue them in federal court. But how are you going to sue Facebook? How are you going to sue Twitter? People have tried. It's a real problem because they're private companies. They control more than the government controls in many ways, but it's harder to assert legal theories about them. Same with Google and Apple in their app stores, that if you get cut off from their app stores and you have a website, it's very hard for people to reach you. They can reach you. They can just go directly to your website, but the ease of downloading an app is not there. And payment processors are the new avenue by which conservative groups, non-liberal groups are being attacked because they'll avoid your ability to raise money. You can't be paid by PayPal. PayPal will fire you. Stripe will fire you. GoFundMe will kick you off. It's really become a problem. And I do think that what's happening now to Parler, which we'll hear more about, really is the test case for the modern, complete deplatforming model that used to apply only to the worst of the worst of the worst, and now is being broadened. One side note I will make, and I'm not going to say a lot more about Parler because we have the Parler person here, is I do think it's very interesting, and I don't think this has gotten much attention. I don't know if it was mentioned in the court papers, but in mid-December, Amazon Web Services, the one that just deplatformed Parler, signed a big hosting deal with Twitter. So Amazon Web Services deplatformed the emerging competitor to Twitter. Think about that, how much power they have. What have we done? Because I know that you want to hear solutions and you want to hear what people are doing. What have we done? Well, like I said, this didn't just happen to us. We've seen this developing. So our videos, we no longer keep exclusively at YouTube. We still have several hundred videos there, but they're also kept after that incident on a second public platform, and they're also kept in a non-public backup platform. So if we were to lose that account again, our work product, our work of now 10 years would not be lost. But of course, not being on YouTube is a big blow to anybody who wants their material to be seen. We also developed a backup plan, which I'm assured will actually work, that if our hosting service were to turn us off for whatever the reason, that we could be back up and running somewhere else in a day. That essentially every night our entire platform is uploaded to a non-party site, someplace not at our hosting service. And that's something we developed several years ago, again, after this YouTube experience of waking up and finding out you have nothing. We've been diversifying social media. Parler was going to be one of our big diversifications, and we started that back in June. We did not start it recently. We were not somebody who flocked to Parler after the Capitol Hill riot and the deplatforming of Trump. We've been there for 8 months, and it's been a great experience. And certainly my casual observation is that Parler is no worse and probably much better than the absolute garbage and threats and conspiracy theories I see every day on Twitter and to a lesser extent on Facebook. We're at MeWe, we're at Gab, but none of these, frankly, is a substitute for the largest platforms out there, just in terms of volume. But there are alternatives that people are going to have to use. We are working towards expanding our email list so that we have a direct channel to people, and that if anything were to ever happen with our social media platforms, we could reach people directly. And we have 2 email services that we use, the one we primarily use, and then a backup email service. We also have been investigating, no decisions made yet, but investigating whether we should move off of various Google platforms in terms of email, calendar, etc. We already have a Proton Mail account, but it's really just a single account. So we're looking into what services they offer. We've started using Signal to communicate with each other for small groups rather than Slack, which we've been using for a while. We're not leaving Slack, but we're beginning to investigate these alternatives, as many people are. And that's what we're doing. And I think more businesses, more websites, you're going to have plan B and plan C and maybe plan D if you want to stay alive, because it's not enough that you might be kicked off of Twitter or Facebook. You may get a notification or no notification from your hosting company that you're gone. And by then, if you don't have a plan, it's too late. In terms of personal privacy, I think that as a lot of people, I've never had Facebook or Twitter apps on my phone. I just removed WhatsApp, although I didn't really use it for my phone, which is now owned by Facebook. And now I'm looking into possibly different browsers. I think Michelle will talk about some of those. And I really don't use Facebook anymore. I haven't left it because it still is a means of keeping in touch with high school friends and people like that. I mean, that's one of the things why Facebook is irreplaceable. Just the sheer number and magnitude of people on there is astounding. And so that's what we're doing. That's what we've observed. And now I will turn it over to Amy to talk to us about what's going on with Parler.
Hi, okay, can you hear me? Think so? Okay, good, great. So thanks for having me here at Parler. As you can imagine, we have been working steadily, almost around the clock, although we have started to actually make more time for sleep and things because we're in this for the long haul. But we are working steadily to get ourselves back online and better than before. I don't know if any of you have noticed, but we actually do have a static web page up, and it's stayed up despite, I think, people trying to hack into it and take it down because there's still a lot of haters out there. But that is the first step, and we are working towards coming back. I can't tell you exactly when that is, but what I do know is that we're going to come back better than before. I do appreciate what you said, Professor, about the the issue of the content, this inciting and violent content that nobody wants on their platform. As I said from the beginning, I knew that content was everywhere, and I did think that Parler had been unfairly singled out for this. And it has come out over the last weeks. I don't know if you've seen articles in both Salon, Washington Post, surprisingly enough, other places, people talking about the fact that this content was on other platforms, and that perhaps on Facebook, where the groups feature existed, it was even more, the place where people could plan easily the sorts of events that went on the 6th of January. So I think now the truth has come out, but of course it's too late, and we're deplatformed and we're singled out. And I've had a lot of time, of course, over the last week or so, and where I've been trying to make our case in the media, thinking about exactly why it is that Parler has been singled out and really kind of what's going on. And as you've observed, on Parler, for example, we delivered a chronological feed. No algorithmic manipulation of content. So that's perhaps why you got more engagement, why you would have more followers. We heard those anecdotes a lot of times, that people who supposedly even had larger followings on Twitter would get more engagement in terms of comments and echoes and things like that on Parler. So that is one thing that we did offer, we're going to when we get up again, is just a completely non-manipulated feed, no shadow banning, no, disparate application of guidelines or terms of service based on ideology, none of those types of things. So we're going to do that. We're going to bring that back again. What we're going to come back with that'll be different will be a different enforcement mechanism for our terms, because even though we don't think necessarily that we had a worse problem with respect to that type of content than the other platforms, of course, we know that when we come back, people are going to be looking, and we're going to be looking ourselves to do a much better job. We actually have a goal to, with respect to inciting content, actual illegal content, to do a better job than the other platforms. And we have a plan that we're working on in order to actually make that happen. So that's what's going on with Parler. But I did want to talk a little bit about the thinking that I've been doing over the last weeks. And there was a great piece in the Wall Street Journal the other day called Save the Constitution from Big Tech. And I don't know if you have seen that piece, but there's a couple of professors who wrote about this. And the thing that they talked about was with Section 230, which provides immunity for these platforms, there are two things that are going on in combination, which makes it less believable that the content removals are not censorship. And so here are of course, the first thing is the legal immunity, right? Section 230 gives legal immunity not only for content that is generated by users, but it also provides legal immunity for the activities, the moderation activities that the platforms do. And I would put in that category for Facebook or Twitter, any of these, both the, what content they're removing and why, right? Their decisions about content removal, and their decisions about any content manipulation, any engagement enhancing algorithms that they have that make it so that they depart from a purely chronological feed like the one that we have in order to favor certain content and disfavor others for whatever reason, right? It could be for engagement. It could be also because they want to suppress viewpoints with which they don't agree. Of course, we don't know what's under the hood there, because all of this is something that you really can't call into question. And I think in large part, this is because of the Section 230 immunity. It's very hard to try to find out even what's under the hood or hold them accountable for this type of behavior. Now, that's the one thing, is the legal immunity. The second thing is that, as we've seen, I'm calling them haranguings. By the way, I've got a blog post over at my blog, don'tletitgo.com. So don'tletitgo.com is if, everything gets cut off the internet except for our single blogs, you can find me at don'tletitgo.com, but I don't think that's going to happen. Parler's going to be back up soon. Anyway, so there I'm talking about, in addition to the immunity, you also have the haranguings that have been going on of these big tech CEOs before Congress. And as you've heard there, the politicians are pressuring these companies to remove more so-called hate speech from their platforms, and at the same time also remove or otherwise tag or put disclaimers on so-called misinformation. Those are the big categories that they talk about, and of course there might end up being others, but if you put together this legal immunity that is granted for the removal of content with the pressure from politicians to engage in more of it, and in particular to restrict the flow of speech that would be protected by the First Amendment, that is a very dangerous combination. And it's one where I am tempted, whereas I've always restricted calling censorship the activities of these platforms, you can see that when you combine those factors, that you could think of it as a censorship by proxy, that we're actually engaging, we're entering into a fascist era where these companies are private technically, supposedly they're private, but there's such a relationship, and the companies have become dependent on the immunity that's granted to them to preserve the pillars of their monetization model, meaning those engagement algorithms And in addition, any sorts of data that they are mining and gathering and profiling and things like that, all of that is protected because of the 230 immunity and their cozy relationship with the government. So what do I see going forward now? As I said, Parler was initially singled out as supposedly the platform on which all of the planning of the events for the 6th took place. And the truth has since come out. And you might wonder, what's in it for Washington Post? Salon, for example, had this article where you thought, that's actually sounding a little bit favorable towards Parler. What's going on with this? And I was thinking early this morning that if they now are starting to shift the blame to all the platforms, it's going to serve the purposes of the next step of the totalitarian agenda, which is to take up Mark Zuckerberg as in his engraved invitation. If you recall, Mark Zuckerberg, when he's sitting before Congress at these hearings, he is practically inviting them to amend Section 230 in such a way that it requires the sort of content moderation that he and some of the other established platforms are doing. And in particular, he talked first about the issue of just every year they would file a report about how much hate speech and how much this and how much that they had and how they dealt with it. And then this is just transparency. So that was one of his suggestions. The second suggestion was a little bit more ominous, which is that any platform that enjoys Section 230 immunity should have to demonstrate a minimum level of effectiveness with respect to these various categories of content. This is what he suggested during this last set of haranguings, as I call them here. Yeah, it's a pun, bad pun. So now all the platforms are being blamed. You might think at the first level, you think, okay, at Parler, we're going to go, phew, oh, that's great. We're off the hook. We're not, the only ones, and maybe they're even more responsible. But no, because what happens next is the pressure is put on to these platforms to moderate more, that they're not going to have their Section 230 immunity unless they are doing the government's bidding. And of course, this is all necessary in order for public safety, et cetera, right? So then what happens? The other thing that I've learned in the last week, 10 days or so, as we're starting to explore the sorts of algorithms that are available to scan for this type of content on a platform, and we're trying to explore ways that this can be done consistent with our commitment to privacy. And we are working on ways that I think we can do this. But what you learn is that, at least as it stands right now, the algorithms that are available to do this are mostly geared towards hate speech. And this is not surprising, right? Because what do the big established platforms do? What is the standard out there for content moderation, as they call it these days? It is to flag hate speech. So can you imagine an amended Section 230 where they accept Zuckerberg's invitation? He also had an ad in the New York Times, which I've put in my blog post because I screen grabbed it back in December. He says, we're in favor of improved regulations for the internet. They take his invitation, they incorporate the so-called transparency and the, kind of efficiency, how good are we at removing this terrible content, et cetera. And they include hate speech as among the things. Why? Because it really is, I think, out there being used as a proxy for illegal speech at the best. And of course, a lot of them, they want to remove that speech from the platforms anyway. So I'm envisioning where you have this regulation, all the content has to be scanned and categorized according to this. You have to file reports every year in order to get your Section 230 immunity. You have to show a certain level of effectiveness in dealing with this content, perhaps including hate speech. And then suddenly you really do have censorship by proxy when it's put into Section 230 as a requirement. Moreover, then you start to think about sort of the other prong that's been my concern for so long, which is privacy. And if you start thinking about platforms being required to maintain, a documentation about what they've done with this content, as an ordinary business record. And then you think of that in conjunction with what some of you might be familiar with is called the third-party doctrine. The third-party doctrine says that whenever you share information with a third party, like a social media platform, that information is no longer protected by the Fourth Amendment. Government can obtain it without a warrant, no probable cause, no particularized suspicion, and the pretext for obtaining that information could be something like the fact that it has to be collected in order to comply with government regulations. And then you start to really get, sort of conspiracy minded yourself. Maybe you start thinking along the lines of Minority Report or something, that these social media platforms, in order to comply with an enhanced Section 230, will have to maintain profiles potentially, or at least they'll have an excuse to, and they've already got this relationship back and forth with the government. FTC consent decree with Facebook last year was concerning, and I've written about that over at Legalized Privacy. So that's what I see that concerning now, right? You might have thought at the first level, I'd say, okay, now Salon is taking the heat off of Parler and putting it on Facebook. But I don't see it that way at all, because I see it that it is going to push it towards requiring platforms to remove more and more content. The algorithms for narrowly removing incitement are not that good. And that could be just because of demand, that there hasn't been demand for that yet. The algorithms for the broader swath of hate speech, which is what he's been inviting, Zuckerberg's been inviting Congress to regulate about that, those are better. And it's concerning. It's concerning. So, what is the future of this for Parler? First of all, our thing is just to get back online and fight this battle. We have also recently, controversially, come out for a full repeal of Section 230, which sounds like it could be incredibly messy, but it's not like there was no pre-existing legal precedent before that. And I have had a discussion back and forth on Twitter with Jeff Kosseff, who's a professor who specializes in Section 230. And I put a link to that discussion again in my blog post. But, we went through all the different permutations and combinations. What would the standard of care be? I mean, for us at Parler, we would actually not mind if people see under the hood of what we're doing, because we're not doing any engagement enhancing algorithms or manipulating data in any way. We're going to be very transparent about how we're doing the moderation. We have been in the past as well. We have the community jury system, et cetera. So that's fine with us. But I think if you start thinking about if Facebook had no Section 230 and you had to hold them to a certain standard of care, you'd say, okay, Facebook, given all of the algorithms that you have running on your platform and the profiles that you make of people because you monetize all that data and everything, shouldn't you really be aware of all of this inciting content on your platform? And shouldn't you be held responsible for it? As it stands right now, no. So if you talk about a future in which we're going to have an enhanced Section 230 along the lines that Mark Zuckerberg is hoping for, with a regulation that's going to require the removal of more and more content and record keeping and potential invasions of privacy, take that scenario versus a repeal of Section 230, which might result in some litigation fees at the beginning and be kind of messy, but then common law judges, smart judges dealing in the real world, can have a chance to work these cases out and be rational about it and hold platforms to a normal standard of care. We actually don't think it would mean the end of social media platforms on the internet. It need not. So that's our thinking in a nutshell. And as I said, I'm optimistic that we're going to get online pretty soon. I don't know when, but we will definitely keep you posted.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Amy. We really appreciate you being here and for your thoughts on all of this. And before I turn it over to Michelle, I just wanted to interject quickly too that through the course of especially the last week and a half, like Amy, I've done a lot of thinking, a lot of introspection in regard to our relationship with technology, right? And so we have 3 kids. technology's everywhere. It's so easy to click on something that's streaming. You have all of these streaming services. We have all of these apps, which I think to a certain degree, most of us have used without thinking a whole lot beyond what that really means and what we're actually doing when we download these things and give them access, and even the things that we stream, because it's a convenience and it's a cheap convenience. And you have access to so many more things than you did even when I was a kid. And of course, that's exponentially more so with generations beyond that. And so I think moving forward, we're really going to have to take not just one step back, but a couple steps back to reevaluate our relationship with technology, what good that it serves for us and what it is that we're trying to accomplish, and also take a really hard look at the detriment that it can bring, right? Whether it's through programming or, just subtle messaging too. We've cut several services over the last year, including Netflix, because of the skew for things. There were a handful of programs there that were so steeped in things that are just completely inappropriate for children. And these are things that are being marketed directly towards our kids on channels that we've been told are safe for our kids. And so we pulled the plug, and we're kind of going down the list now. We're saying, okay, what is it that we have? And taking a good hard look at these companies, because ultimately we're in the driver's seat at the end of the day. If the market demand crashes for these platforms, for Facebook, despite whatever conveniences, I mean, I lived overseas a couple different times, so I love Facebook for the fact that I can stay connected with people that I've met throughout a huge journey, right? At the end of the day, though, is it worth it? No, I don't think it is. I'm not willing to continue to feed something that's actively working to destroy our livelihood. And then that's what this is. And I think that's really what has people so unsettled by this. So as we move forward, and I think just kind of as a preface to what Michelle is about to share in terms of alternate platforms and programs that you may or may not be aware of, I think really the onus is on each and every one of us in the way that we can fight, if you will, in terms of how we respond to what's happening in the tech sphere here. And so just because we have had this question a couple times, yes, I will put links to the platforms that Michelle will suggest in the chat section. And then when we do post a partial video, we usually post a highlight section of our online programming. We'll do that sometime this next week. I'll include those links there, so you don't feel like you have to scramble and grab all of this now. If you don't capture it now, it will be available for you later. And so with that, Michelle, please inform us.
Well, first I wanted to say I have known Kimberly and I've known Amy for a very, very, very long time, and I respect the work both of them have done, not just in the political space, but Amy's done a lot of really great work in the privacy space. And as of the last 4 or 5 years, Kimberly's been exceedingly thoughtful about talking about technology and in the home. And interestingly, I come from a completely different place than almost everyone else on the panel. I was heavily involved in politics. And then I got heavily involved in technology. And surprisingly, all of this stemmed from something Kimberly may or may not remember. I believe it was BlogCon 2012. Will Kane gave a keynote speech on the juxtaposition of hubris and innovation. And the idea for me that what is happening right now, particularly in technology, is something that we need to focus our energy on fighting, is actually, in my opinion, a waste of energy. Things have always evolved. People have always innovated to overcome. Will Kane's keynote speech focused a great deal on the agricultural time in the development of this country, moving into the industrial, moving into the information age. And while those things are happening much faster now, they are out there. The solutions are out there. And so I tend to caution people that what you're using right now as a platform, as a means of communication, as a means of streaming television, as a means of storing your most precious memories, are not permanent and the only solutions. And those things innovate daily and rapidly, and sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse. That being said, there are solutions out there, and I get a lot of pushback, particularly from the center and right-leaning community, about taking the fight to the left and to liberals, and that, you know, the right and center right shouldn't need to abandon these platforms, that their voices aren't being heard, they're being censored. And that may well be, but that doesn't leave us without opportunities. And those opportunities include taking our audiences with us. One of the things that should be very, very clear to people who have been using social media for the last 10 years is that you're the product of these social media companies. You're fed advertisements all day long. Your data is collected and sold. You have no privacy expectations whatsoever on any of these platforms. And while the convenience has outweighed those perils for people until now, I think a lot of people are starting to see that. And rather than taking the fight to these platforms and spending the time continuing to be their product, despite the fact that they are censoring your ideas, my suggestion has always been use them to the best of your ability, while you build an audience, while you recommend that your audience move elsewhere. And so with that in mind, there are some suggestions that I have, and these are personal picks, and by no means are they every possible opportunity out there. But before I mention any platforms or solutions specifically, I do want to say that many of these are new. They are evolving and innovating as the need for them happens. And you will see times, even I remember when I first joined Parler, poor Amy had to join me for lunch and convince me that my privacy wasn't at risk and I was in control of what was going on there. Bless you for that. And so you'll need to keep in mind that these platforms haven't scaled yet for mass adoption. They are in beta phases and they are in testing phases, and they've been chugging along for years with very small audiences. And so there may be glitches here and there, but most of them have, the ones I'm going to mention, have directed their focus to not treating you as a product, giving you control over your personal information, giving you opportunities to request that information and be forgotten on their platforms. The right to be forgotten is something that doesn't exist in this country. I do hope it will be coming very soon. It exists it
does for California.
It does exist as in the form of the CCPA in California, which is a modification of something called the General Data Protection Rules in the EU, GDPR. And I do think it will be coming to the US, just not fast enough to suit me. So what I would say, the very first thing I would suggest you do is make a list of the services you definitely think you need in your life. Because as Kimberly mentioned before, the more services you're using, the more information about yourself you're putting out there. And the more you are inviting these platforms into your personal life and your private information. So first, make a list of the things you actually think you need in your life. Next, with regard to the things you do every day online, I have 3 rules when I try out a new platform. I actually read their terms of service. Please do so. If you sign up for a platform and you have not read the terms of service, it doesn't give you a really high ground to argue about what that platform is doing with the posts you're putting out there, the information you've given them. I also read their privacy policies. These are not typically very long, and you need to make decisions about that. And also you need to look into whether they offer protection for you. Is there remedy if you are attacked on their platform, if your account has been hacked? Is there a clear way for you to get support? We all know that doesn't exist on Twitter and Facebook. They have built support mechanisms that are worse than those automated phone services we all love so much. So all of that to say, I'm going to go very quickly down a list, and Kimberly will put links for you to these. For browsers, I personally have been using Brave since 2015. It's a very simple browser that blocks all advertisements by default, doesn't collect any of your personal information, and speeds up your browsing tremendously, both on your mobile phone and your laptop. The other browser that I have used is Tor. Tor is a little more technically complicated to use, but certainly not impossible to use. Along with those, I no longer use Google for search. I use DuckDuckGo for search, and I've been doing that for 5 years now. For email, I personally use Proton Mail. It's end-to-end encryption, and Proton is free. That offers a number of features that a lot of other encrypted email services don't give you at the free level. If you do decide to pay for Proton Mail, I personally recommend it. You also get file sharing. You get and a VPN is included. So and as well as storage. So it's a full suite of products for about $100 a year with Proton Mail. But with mail, somebody mentioned Tutanota. There's also Prevail, which is another service that attaches to your existing email and encrypts. For messaging, I personally prefer Signal. Signal has rapidly expanded its feature set. You can also make phone calls individually and group, and everything is encrypted end to end. You can set your messages to disappear. Nobody has a record of anything. The one caveat there is you can still take screenshots of Signal on phones, so just keep that in mind. But there is also many other services. Discord, which I will caution is a skin of Slack. It is very useful, it is very handy, and it has massive, huge, engaging communities, but there's no privacy at all on Discord. It's not encrypted. Telegram has expanded a great deal. There is end-to-end encryption on Telegram, but I would caution on Telegram that it is a target for hackers and social engineers and spammers because there is a lot of crypto activity there. For video and podcasting hosting, I like Library, which runs a platform called Odyssey. You control everything there. You can actually run a server for Library or Odyssey and keep everything on your own computer. You never have to worry about losing it. There is a social media platform called Minds that I am a huge fan of and have been on for about 6 years now. Minds also has video hosting, live streaming. It is very much like a thinned out Facebook that respects your right to free speech and privacy. They have end-to-end encrypted messaging. They currently have removed comments on their apps, but you can access them from your browser on your phone or on your laptop and get full functionality, which leads me to social. I'm a big fan of Minds. I have accounts on Parler, Gab, MeWe, Ello, True, and several other platforms that nobody uses and no one has ever heard of because they haven't expanded yet. With all of these, I offer the same caution that I did before. Security, privacy, and protection are your responsibility because you are absolutely the product of every platform in some way or another, even if they offer you things like encryption and the ability to the right to be forgotten and tell you that they don't store your data. These are all your responsibilities. Change your passwords often. I highly recommend using a password manager like 1Password or LastPass. And I am adamant that anybody I work with, I set up a lot of accounts for people, business accounts, social media accounts, that they do not use SMS, which is text 2FA. That will text you a code if you try to log in. There are many, many apps out there that allow you to get 2FA codes for websites. And most websites, including Apple apps now, offer 2FA. Two-factor authentication or one-time passwords. Set them up for everything and use them. They're kind of a pain. They take a little bit of getting used to, but it is the best thing you can do for your privacy and security. And then before I know, we need to get to questions really quickly. You guys have been asking a lot of really great ones. The last thing I want to say is We use words. I see a lot of words thrown around like Facebook is irreplaceable. Twitter is irreplaceable. They're the largest platform out there. They're monopolies and they're ganging up on us and we can't be heard. But the question I always ask people is, who do you want to hear you? Because if you think people on the left are listening to you, or WAPO is going to put your tweet in one of their articles and ask you to come be a contributor, you're mistaken. If your purpose for being online is to rally people around a cause that you care deeply about, the most important thing is not the platform you're on and how much traffic it sees, but the audience that you're reaching. And if Twitter and Facebook are censoring you, shadow banning you, limiting your reach, accusing you of violating their rules, you're not even reaching the audience you want to reach. So I highly suggest check out these other platforms, find ones you're comfortable with, and take your friends with you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And yes, we have so many questions. And just to reiterate too, especially for anyone who joined us late, I have put the links for everything that Michelle just suggested in the chat section. We will also be publishing those on the Legal Insurrection blog at some point this week. I mean, as we are all aware, the news cycle is going to be, it's going to be a news cycle unlike anything I've probably seen in the last decade. But we will ensure that you have that information because we do believe that this is very important. So without further ado, which I know I've said a lot tonight, that just stuck in my head, let me go ahead and get to questions. So this is just kind of a fun question for Michelle. Ray's asking, what's the translation to the text on the audio tape behind you?
The text on the audio tape behind me actually changes. I didn't mention this, but I never show where I'm at personally. That whole privacy thing is very big for me, and so I'm big on personal backgrounds. I can change the text, and right now it says, "You're responsible for you."
I love it. Thank you. Let's see. Let me go down here. So this question is from Rodney, and I'm going to open this up to anyone who has an answer to this because I think this is really important. This is surviving the big tech purge. Any plans on going on offense? Anyone?
I could say something in that regard, and it's something that I mentioned in this blog post that I said I wrote today. I have a colleague who was saying we should try to be activist, let's be activist in addition to what we're doing. I said, just offering this product that we want to offer in the world is plenty activist. So, really trying to just live your life the way that you want to. And as Michelle is talking about, think, and you as well, Kimberly, about, getting the values that you want from the technology and living true to your principles and just living your life. I think that's enough, and just trying to do that consistently and pushing back when people are trying to invade your boundaries, I think is enough of a fight. I don't know what offensive would be. And if you want to spend your limited time on this planet doing a lot of offensive work, that's kind of my perspective at this point. We want to offer this product to people to help stimulate civil discourse out there, a nonpartisan public square. And if we just do that and do what's required to get the message out and do that, we're happy.
Yeah, and I agree. I think taking your audience with you, moving away from what has always been to what may be is activism in the truest sense. You are physically making a choice to make a move, to leave behind something that is no longer working for you, to find something that does.
And talking about audiences, I think maybe I approach this from a little different angle because we're trying to get people to come to our website and read our material. The reason we haven't left Facebook, as much as they throttle us, as much as they frankly manipulate what content we put there. We won't put anything there about global warming. One of the incidents I mentioned to you that we got tagged for was we wrote a post based on Australian mainstream news reporting that the massive wildfires they had there were caused primarily by arson and by bad land management. And we were tagged and got a ding against us because we failed to mention the contributing factor of global warming. Okay, I mean, that's how ridiculous it is. So we stay away because we know we're going to get tagged. We stayed away from post-election disputes because you could say something perfectly reasonable and get tagged. So we have been manipulated there, but we won't say things we don't believe. But we thought, should I move away from Facebook? Now, we're not dependent on social media, unlike a lot of websites. I mean, if all our social media disappeared tomorrow, we'd lose maybe 15 or 20%. That's all, everything. I mean, most of our traffic is organic. People come to us. But 10 or 15 or 20% is meaningful to us. And we stay at Facebook because we still reach an audience there. May not be the full audience we should, but we do reach an audience there. And we get, I don't know what the measure is, but, 5 or 7% of our traffic comes from Facebook, from people who wouldn't hear us if we said, oh, well, Facebook is manipulating us, we're going to leave. And that's why we're there. Twitter, on the other hand, we get nothing from. Okay, it's almost not measurable. I'm not even sure why we're there, other than it is a good news feed. I mean, it is, because you've got so many people there. It's a really good news feed. Parler was great. I mean, I think we found our audience. Okay, and then
we're gonna be back. We're gonna be back. Okay. Just stay tuned.
I mean, Parler was really great, and that what it proved to me is you have to find your audience. We weren't finding it at Twitter because there's no other explanation. I mean, why we do so well on Facebook and we do so well on Parler, but not on Twitter. I mean, it can't just be there's something wrong with us. So I don't want to say goodbye to audiences, even if they're not the full audience we should have on those platforms.
Yeah, and I think too, I think what we have to understand too, as we're moving forward, we are in a new era, and I use those words very intentionally, where we are experiencing a brave new internet world. And so the things that we've been lulled into, which, everyone using the same large platforms, all of that's changing. And so we're all trying to figure out what works for us. And like I said, as we really start to consider our relationship with technology, the use for it, its role in our lives, how it benefits us, and how we can better leverage it as a tool as opposed to a means of connection, and the ways that we so rely upon it now. Because the truth is, we don't need any of it. We just don't. We all grew up in a time where we didn't have these things. And I think many of us could argue it was a simpler time. It was a better time because we had time, right? It wasn't eaten up by all of these things. That said, it does have benefits in terms of being able to quickly disseminate information that you're not going to find elsewhere. But I think we just have to be open-minded. We have to be careful. We have to be, as I've said, introspective, and really thoughtful moving forward. I think ultimately, we will find platforms that work. There may be, again, I don't think Parler is the first that's going to encounter this. I think, as Professor Jacobson mentioned earlier, it's probably a test case. And so as we move forward, I think we have to be open-minded. We have to be flexible. We have to be willing to let go of some things that we have settled into as being normal. Because, yeah, Facebook is great for connecting, but it's also awful for a lot of other things. But I do feel at least heartened that Facebook seems to think I still live in New York, and Instagram thinks that I'm British. So at least I've done something to their algorithms well enough to confuse them there. But that said, I think the way we think about these things has to change if we want to protect ourselves and if we want to be able to use these sites for their intended purposes. I was in college when Facebook came about, and it was created to connect with your friends in classes and make study groups. And that's what we used it for, so I was a very early adapter in that sense. And I've watched it evolve and change over the years, and the amount of information that you could put in and all that kind of stuff, which I never added because I'm going, why do you care? Why is it your business? That said, I've always dwelt with the assumption that anything I put on the internet is public game, always. So that's why over the years, a lot of these privacy concerns, I'm going, okay, well, so don't put it there. Don't use the platform because anyone has access to that. This is not your information. If you are sharing this, it is not your information any longer. So just to add that in, but I do want to get back to questions. This question is from Gary, and I'm going to open this to whomever might be able to best answer it. Big tech lost about 51 billion on the market last week. How much of an impact did that have on them? Maybe Amy could speak to that, or Michelle. Anyone?
I don't see Michelle volunteering. Okay.
Well, I was going to say it had no impact.
I'll speak to that. I don't think it has any impact on them. I don't think
it made Jack make a thread on Twitter.
What was
right?
that?
I mean,
he did the whole thread talking about, did we do the right thing by banning Trump and all that stuff? Remember that thread?
That
they didn't unban Trump.
The only one it potentially could have an impact on, in my view, is Twitter, because Twitter is the weakest of the links there, and their stock has been under serious pressure, and I think you're going to see a lot of people leaving Twitter. So Twitter is the worst business model out there for the biggest company. So I think it could impact Twitter, but I don't know. I mean, I have found these big tech companies to be very insular, impervious to any sort of reasoning. And I think that just like they'll tell us we had a community standards violation, and they won't tell us what it is. Okay, or they'll tell me we're doing something we're not doing, and they won't show it to me because their investigative methods are proprietary. Or they'll just lock you out of your account with no notice whatsoever. The way I would analogize it is, I know a lot of people who work at these various companies, and they're not bad people. They don't wake up every morning thinking, how are we going to stifle free speech? But they are cogs in a very big wheel, which is designed to manipulate people, to monetize people. And what's very scary now is now aligned with a political party. And so they go to work, they do whatever they do at Facebook or Google. They go home and they're lovely neighbors, but they're pieces in a machine, which is not very good for our society in so many ways, and now has been politicized. So stock prices, maybe not. So, somebody's only worth 75 billion now rather than 90. I don't think they really care. Now, outside investors, what I'm waiting to see is if there are any shareholder lawsuits against Twitter, because Twitter has essentially destroyed its business model. What made Twitter so wonderful for so many years? Everybody of all political viewpoints was on Twitter. That's where you could interact with left-wing journalists and tweet at them, and they could tweet back at you. But they've killed it. They've killed their business model. It's now the place where left-wing people go, and conservative people kind of hang on when they're not getting banned.
And
I think Twitter's destroyed their business model, and at some point, if the stock price, I think it's down 15 or 20%, if it keeps sliding, I think some of the institutional shareholders are going to get very upset.
I think that's certainly possible. I think, though, with the next administration coming in, I think the revenue model, I think this might be the first year Twitter actually makes money. So Twitter's been losing money from the very beginning. They're not a profitable company, and their price to earning ratio is just absurd. I mean, it's something absurd. Like, they're 30% in the negative. I wouldn't be surprised if Twitter actually cut staff dramatically over this next year, because they don't necessarily have to function as a censor as much as they used to. And personally, I would love to see that happen, because they're users have gone elsewhere. I mean, the professor is right. You can no longer freely engage in conversation, discussion, or debate with somebody on the other side of the political aisle, because to do so is to get yourself flagged, shadow banned, or suspended.
You're muted, Bill.
I notice a bunch of people in the chat, it's more than one person, have mentioned, well, you've got to leave these platforms because you're essentially feeding the beast by being there. And I'm very cognizant of that, and it troubles me. On the other hand, I don't want to cut ourselves off from an audience. And so, yes, being on Twitter, being on Facebook does help them monetize their business because we're a user. Okay, they can serve us ads even if we don't want them. So it's something we think about all the time. Don't think we don't think about it. But the decision currently is we're reaching tens of thousands of people who otherwise would not see our material on Facebook. Admittedly, we're not reaching many on Twitter, but Twitter, yeah. So if we were to leave anywhere, it would be Twitter. And I just figure out another way, maybe with the dummy account, to get a news feed there.
Yeah, and I think considerations too are a little bit different for personal use versus publishing use. And as Professor Jacobson mentioned, we're constantly weighing this. I know, at least on a personal level, I'll be archiving my accounts and shutting them down because they have no use for me anymore. And personally, I'm not going to continue to feed the beast, which is, a term we use, whether it's for the blog or any of these other things. Because I have reached a point where these things serve no purpose for me. And especially watching what we've watched, especially the past 2 weeks, I can't in good conscience continue to feed them. And I won't. So there's that. But there's also a transition period too, right? Because we do have audiences and we need to communicate well where we are and where we're going so that we can stay in contact and we can continue to share things and connect in ways that social media does allow for. So one question I do want to pose to Michelle, because I know I had asked her the same question and I've seen it pop up a couple times in Telegram versus Signal. There's something floating around out there that Twitter owns Telegram and that Signal is a CIA thing. Can you provide a little bit of clarity there?
Yeah, so Signal was actually founded as a nonprofit and not in this country. Signal is not a CIA thing. I will tell you this. There is no application on the internet where you absolutely cannot be found by someone who thinks that you're up to something nefarious. Many of you may or may not know I'm a huge crypto proponent. If you don't know anything about crypto, you've heard of Silk Road being busted by, people for selling drugs. So there is no precaution you can take on the internet. Telegram was founded by one of the same companies that Twitter acquired several years ago. But Telegram separated itself out as a private, nonprofit, and open-sourced messenger platform, which is to say Jack Dorsey has money in both Telegram and in Signal. Does he have any say? Not that I can imagine. They both have boards of directors and are required to report publicly. And Telegram is based outside of the country. They were based in Russia, I believe. They're in Dubai now. So do they have agreements with law enforcement officials in this country? Yes, 100%, absolutely. Are they under the influence of big tech, Facebook, Twitter? No.
I mean, one thing I want to focus on here is there are two different issues. One is maintaining your privacy versus companies like Facebook and those sort of entities. The other thing is maintaining your privacy versus the government, okay? And they're two very different things. The US government, like most governments, or at least governments of big countries, do a lot of things really poorly, okay? But the one thing they all do really well is spying. okay? And that gets to the whole point of this program. We're not advising people on how to hide from the government, okay? Because you can't, okay? It's impossible. Don't think you can. But you can, to an increasing point, hide from Facebook and hide from these big tech conglomerates, which, Google and things like that. And that's what I think we all need to really be focused on, because, the government's probably got back doors to every product we've talked about today, whether the people who run the product know it or not, okay? And that's just the reality of the world, is there's no hiding from the government of China or the government of Russia or the government of the United States. They're just too sophisticated. What we're really talking about here is protecting your privacy from the commercial world.
Absolutely. And just the last thing I have to say on this matter is your personal information, your privacy, and your personal security, your financial security, they don't matter to Facebook. They don't matter to Twitter. They don't matter to Google at all. I kind of had a chuckle when I first joined on and I saw the chat room where everybody joined in with their legal real name and told me where you are. And, these are things that people just don't think about because we've gotten so used to putting them out there. But, out of the 305 people participating in I bet I can find 100 of you and find your bank accounts in 5 minutes. And so, because now I know where you all are, you just told me. So keep in mind that they care even less about the information you're using. And, as you move to other platforms, make sure they care about you. Make sure they want you to be a user. And they're there to protect you as your speech as much as they are your information.
I mean, just so people know, while we do post the video, we do not post the chat on the website. So we can't, and we don't sell information. We don't sell our email list. We don't share it. We don't do any of those things. But the world is the world, okay? And big tech is big tech.
Yeah, we're very careful about that. So if you have signed up, I promise I am the official list manager. We only contact you when we feel it's necessary to do so, and never have we even considered or entertained sharing lists, selling lists, nor will we ever. We've never bought lists either. What we've created from people who want to be involved with what we have to offer, period. And unsubscribing, it takes a click of a button. So, and that's by design. So we do have a couple questions about Section 230, because I think that's really relevant to this discussion and not something we've discussed as much as some of the nuts and bolts of where to go in the absence of Facebook and Twitter being viable alternatives. And there's two questions, and I'll just put them out there together. David asks, what would be the effect if Section 230 was removed entirely? And then Paul in Sweden says, does 230 need to be modified or clarified by Congress, or can it, as some have suggested, be done by the FCC itself?
Well, I wish I could offer some guidance on that, but I really only have a, superficial, popularized understanding of Section 230. Seems like Amy knows a lot more about that than I do.
I don't know. I'm not an expert on it, but I've done a lot of thinking and reading about it. So as for what happens if it's repealed, what would happen is we'd go back to the state of the law before Section 230, and there was some conflicting precedent. But it seems to be the case that if you really do run a platform very much like a bulletin board, and you are just allowing for the posting of user-generated content, then by and large, courts will hold the person who posts it responsible for that content. And I think that was a CompuServe case, if I'm not mistaken. So it could be messy for a while to see what precedent actually comes out of it. And it is true that the bigger established companies with bigger budgets would be better prepared to handle the litigation costs, perhaps. But also at the same time, the larger platforms, they have more to lose, and there's more subject to discovery, because there is quite a lot that they do on their platforms with algorithms. And so perhaps you would say that they should be more aware of content that violates the law on their platforms than one that doesn't have the kind of resources and algorithms trained on the content everywhere. So, exactly what I think it would, be messy maybe for a while, but after the dust settles, I do believe that platforms could survive without Section 230. Like I said, I've got that debate on Twitter with the expert. Jeff Kossoff wrote The 26 Words That Created the Internet, and it's linked to the debate that I had with him on Twitter, is linked to from my blog at don'tletitgo.com at the bottom of the post. As for what my preference would be, I don't know if you're familiar, there was a case called Malwarebytes versus Enigma that the Supreme Court recently refused to hear. But as a comment on that, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote in favor of what is deemed, it's kind of considered by the Volokh Conspiracy blog, for example, a narrow interpretation of Section 230. And so what he is recommending is that people don't go around talking about whether a platform per se is a publisher or it's a platform, that you actually look with respect to particular pieces of content as to whether that content is purely user generated or it's something that the platform has had a role in creating or modifying in some way. And you would actually start to hold platforms liable for those times that they are either creating or modifying content. It's clear in certain cases. So for example, there's a case going around that involved Laura Loomer, and she had sued, I believe, it was Facebook. She sued Facebook for defamation. Facebook actually made a statement about her in an explanation as to why they had removed her from the platform. And in that, they actually treated Facebook as a publisher for purposes of the statement that was made. Now, some people look at that case and they say, look, Facebook admitted it was a publisher. It did not, in my interpretation, admit that it was a publisher with respect to everything on the platform, right? But it did admit that it was a publisher with respect to the piece of content that it made about Loomer, explaining why they had removed her from the platform. And so it was tried as a defamation case. Of course, you do have a right to express opinion about somebody based on facts and et cetera. There's a high bar for defamation with respect to public figures. So Facebook still prevailed in that case. And so it might be true with respect to a number of large-scale deplatformings. If that person's a public figure, what would that liability look like? It would be maybe tough to achieve an actual victory in court. But that's what I would like to see is pushing for a narrower interpretation, putting more of the content manipulation and modification, put more of that at issue, maybe the tagging that's done on Twitter. For instance, Parler's website went up, and I went ahead and did post it on Facebook, and what happened was it didn't show this way to me, but it showed this way to other people as false information, big flag that just Parler.com itself, a static web page, is so-called false information. Now, you could say that's defamatory and maybe start going after them if you wanted to. It'd be nice to see more of those types of cases be able to be brought and succeed. And I'm not sure if it would take a repeal of 230 to require that, or if a narrow interpretation would make that possible, as Justice Thomas recommends.
Amy, I just had actually along those same lines, a lot of the conversation I see about the concern about 230 is that deciding to remove user-generated content makes somebody a publisher. And I know that in Section 230, that's something that I've spent a lot of time having conversations about. That is the actual requirement, is that in order to enjoy the freedom to allow users to not be responsible for that content, they still must take a proactive role in actively removing content that they feel violates a law, presents a danger. And I think that narrowing those, like, clarifying that that is actually required in Section 230, that they employ removing certain content that meets legal requirements, and maybe narrowing or more firmly defining what those requirements are, is what a lot of people are looking for in altering 230.
Yeah, so 230 protects whatever decisions they make as to the removal of content right now. They have immunity with respect to their decisions because the authors of it wanted, I guess, to allow them to, get rid of nasty speech from their platforms if they wanted to. For example, you can have whatever you want. In terms of certain content that is mandated, yes. So child sexual abuse material, other types of illegal content, yes, there's a mandate, but it is only when you are actually aware that that content is there. So it would be you're aware, or you should be aware would maybe be the standard, and then you should be taking it down. If you get a DMCA notice, for example, you have to take down and follow the procedures, trademark, etc. So those are the types of requirements. As it stands right now, they are protected in removing anything that they in good faith believe to be objectionable. And so both good faith and objectionable are terms that give them a lot of leeway. And there have been proposals to amend 230 to narrow what is objectionable content, at least, to have certain discrete categories, and so that there wouldn't be as much discretion. That's the moves that I've seen. But I think Clarence Thomas believes that if you were to narrow the interpretation of the current language, you could achieve a lot of the goals that some people have in terms of putting some of the conduct of these platforms at issue. But you'd have to leave that to the real experts to see if that would work.
Okay, so we have two more questions, and then we're going to go ahead and wrap up. The first go directly to Amy, because there are a ton of questions about Parler in terms of, number one, where people can find updates about what's going on with Parler outside of news reports, and number two, if you have any sort of time frame or idea when y'all might be back up and running.
I cannot make any promises in terms of time frame. I can just tell you that we're working steadily, and that we do have the static website up at parler.com, and that's where you just need to keep going and checking in if you're not otherwise. If you go to my feeds, I'll update people as well, obviously, but yeah, parler.com, checking in there. I think they do plan to actually modify the static web page periodically and have a little bit of fun with that on the way while we're trying to get back up online. So it's worth a visit or two there. But yeah, that was the first big step, and we've got definitely more to come, and I'm hoping very soon, but I can't tell you exactly.
No, I appreciate that. And we understand these things are constantly in flux.
Yeah, I mean, that was the whole thing, right? So everybody sort of followed the herd. And so when the three big announcements were made about Google and Amazon and Apple, a number of other vendors pulled support out from under us. And so it's not just those that were required to have us be up on the internet, obviously. And so we've been putting the pieces back together for various things. You'd be surprised, how many different types of services and pieces that you need to put a platform like that together.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. I mean, we're small potatoes, though I like to think we do incredible and amazing work that helps to move the needle. But the number of pieces involved in just keeping our little site and the foundation running are many. And so if one piece falls off, then you're scrambling to find a backup for that. And these things take time, So for everyone watching this, please just, I would encourage you to be patient and know that, I think we can trust that they're doing the absolute best that they can with what they have to get back online as quickly as possible, because particularly with the current climate, having an alternative where we can communicate with one another is even more important. So then the last question goes to probably either Professor Jacobson or Amy, because it does deal with the common carrier status. There's several questions in the comments or in the Q&A section about this, and I'm going to read the one from Garland because it's the most all-encompassing. And he says, is common carrier status a hope long-term? Mafia still get to have telephones, and you can't deny someone buying a hamburger because of their views, and bank accounts are open to all as long as you don't use them illegally. Is there any weight for that in the argument that we're seeing on a wide scale here?
I don't know a whole lot that way. Yeah, I don't. You know, for common carrier, you're talking about things sort of in the sense of forcing companies to provide service against their will, in effect, right? If they don't want to carry us, they should be forced to. Is that the general tenor of those types of questions?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it is. And so, you know, for me, if you look to the common law, where you always like to get old analogies, they used to have law about if you're landlocked, and the only way that you could get to the nearest road would be through your neighbor's property, that somehow the common law would figure out an easement for you or something. So you could see, you know, but whether that would even be necessary, and otherwise, would you like to look at innovation as a way to get around it? Tim Berners-Lee, who had been the inventor of the World Wide Web, is apparently in a project called Inrupt, I think it's called. And he plans to just sort of blast this whole thing and start over with something in Inrupt. You know, I guess it's a play on disrupt or something. Everyone's talking about everything's disruptive. I don't know, but we'd have to go look for more about it. But if he's working on it, I'm pretty hopeful it might provide a way forward where we're not going to be landlocked by Amazon, Google, Apple, etc.
Right. Completely agree. Well, I think that with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to extend our thanks so much to Amy and to Michelle for joining us this evening and offering their expertise and their perspective, especially right now with everything that we're dealing with in the world and in life. And I want to thank each of you for joining us. We know that these are incredible times that we are in at present. And I just want to encourage you to be at peace and know that you are not alone, that there are so many people that we are all in the same boat, even if we can't see each other as we're accustomed to being able to see one another. Everyone's there. And we are in this together. So be encouraged, be at peace, and keep your chin up. And you know where to find us online. You can always find us at legalinsurrection.com. We are a 501c3, and we want to thank you so much for those who have donated. We run an incredibly lean organization. We work really hard, and we try and turn everything that we get right back into programming so that we can offer things like this to you for free. And we'll continue to do so as long as the internet exists, or when we transition to Internet 2.0. So anyway, thank you so much for your time. We so appreciate each and every one of you. And again, our sincere thanks to Michelle and Amy. So thanks
to all of you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.